else. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Feminist Founders. I'm excited today to chat live if you're here on Substack Live, or you can watch this, hopefully, the replay on YouTube and also on the podcast, right? Fingers crossed. We're doing some experimenting today. But if you do join us live, I'd love for you to say hello in the chat so that we can get a little live interaction. But I'm joined today by Dr. Evelyn Carter. So excited to have you here. You're the author of a newer book called Was That Racist? And we have talked a little about a few sort of real life scenarios and other things. And I was just like, I just think this would be a great conversation for our audience. And just so you know, Feminist Founders is people who are entrepreneurs. Many of them are solopreneurs or maybe have some support in the way of like contracted help. We do have some folks who have employees as well. That's a whole other can of worms, obviously, when we talk about some of the things you talk about. But I think a lot of these folks are people who are businesses of one. But ultimately, these are people who really care about creating a more equitable world, a more just and equitable world, and are looking for ways to do that that are really practical. So that's kind of what I want to talk about today. But first, well, first of all, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for
Happy
being
to be
here.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming and doing this. So I want to start with, this is 2026.
Yeah.
You and I had talked briefly about the kind of post-2020 reckoning that happened, you know, in the wake of the coming on the end of Trump's first term and all of the challenges that have that came during his first term. Little did we know. Second term would be even worse. But and obviously George Floyd's murder and kind of this awakening that many white folks had to something you've known the entirety of your life, and anyone who looks similar to you has also known the entirety of their lives. But this awakening to kind of oh, you mean we aren't in fact in a post-racial America, right?
God.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just like remembering when people were like, we're post-racial. And I was like, you guys, it's like, that's not like, no, we're not. But
cool. When the only Black president ever has the biggest scandal because he wore a tan suit, and then we have
tan suit.
Right, we have a white pedophile in the office now, and that's like anyway. Okay, so clearly we're not post-racial, but that sort of feeling that I think a lot of people white people woke up to in 2020. You and many other people who do DEI work were exceptionally busy for a year.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot changed. So I just want to sort of start there and get to 2026 because I'm curious why now for the book. Obviously in 2020, when you were very busy and a lot of people who are doing similar work there were a lot of books like yours, you know, not the same as yours, but a lot of books dealing with issues around race written for white folks were coming out at that time. What made you not write it then? And then kind of what has happened over these last 6 years that you were like, now's the time?
Yeah. It's a great question. I didn't know that I wanted to write a book then. And so, I mean, there's so many things that are going through my mind as you're talking. It's like, I'm reminded of how angry and overworked I was during the summer and fall of 2020 because I was working at a consulting company and the pandemic had just kind of hit the United States in March of that year. And so we had seen this like just indiscriminate like slashing of DEI teams and budgets. And so our company, which was focused on delivering DEI training and strategy, was really struggling. And we had to do layoffs, right? There were all of these things that happened. And then George Floyd was murdered after all of the other murders that had been happening, right? Like I was looking back at my just like writing and like really my calendar from that time. And I was like, oh, there was a lot going on. And I was reflecting on how it felt like literally I would wake up every single day and be like, oh, there's another person's name that's a hashtag. Oh, no. Anyway, when all of that kind of erupted, suddenly those clients that had slashed their teams and their budgets came back and were begging us to do workshops with them. And I was really angry because we had just laid off people that we had to go then try to get back. And the demand that people suddenly had for real conversations about race and racism was like a complete flip from what they had been telling us previously. Like I couldn't get clients to talk about microaggressions because they said, if we have you do a workshop on microaggressions, then that is going to be tacit acknowledgement that we know that microaggressions are happening in the workplace. It's like, yes. they are. Now what?
Right.
And so anyway, I'm just remembering and I actually in November of 2020 ended up having to take a leave of absence from work because my mental health was suffering so much. And so anyway, so probably I didn't think to write the book then because I was drowning in being, all of the things. But what I learned from that experience and kind of that time is that, my dad actually told me, he was like, he's like, you might write a book one day or whatever, but he's like, whenever something happens to you, write it down, send yourself a voice note whenever that moment is fresh, because you're never going to be able to recall all of the same feelings later on that you have in that moment. And so I actually took his advice. So I have a lot of writing from that time. And so they did make their way into my book. But ultimately, the reason for why now is that it was this wonderful kind of serendipitous just thing that happened. I had been scrolling on Instagram. I followed Little Brown Spark, which is an imprint of Little Brown, which is a subset of Hachette. It's like the publishing world is so interesting, as I have
Yes.
learned. And they had a post calling for uh, p- uh, people who were underrepresented in the field of publishing, who had psychology degrees, who wanted to publish a popular press nonfiction book, but had never published anything before. And they were like, if this is you, please submit your proposal. And I was like, like, this is me. Um, and so I submitted my proposal. I got the award. That then led to me getting connected with an agent who then negotiated my actual book deal. And so, I actually didn't identify as a writer. I remember thinking, like, I mean, I came from academia, and so I had
Right.
a hard time kind of writing in the academic style and at the kind of pace that is typically required to get tenure. And so that, I think, really did a number on me. I didn't identify as an author. And somebody actually said, they're like, you really like talking. So, you know, maybe you just think about doing talks instead of writing. And what actually helped me with my book is that I wrote it like I talk. And so but so why now? Because Little Brown Spark and Psychotherapy Networker combined to put out a call for people like me. And I said yes. And here we are. I did not anticipate it would be coming out in this climate. I have worked at places that will not even say the title of my book because the company does not say the word racism and racist. Um, And there have been places that, clients of mine who had previously been talking about how they would love to have me come and talk to their company and whatnot, that it's been radio silence since then. So it's an interesting time. But I'm really proud that my book is out there.
Well, I think it's needed, and I think the timing is probably serendipitous in many ways that this all worked out because, I mean, the only time we needed the book more was yesterday and then the day before
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And like to your point, you said that there were a lot of books that were, kind of came out in 2020 or that people kind of rediscovered around that time. And I have often described my book as a kind of like 201 for
Mhm.
folks. So the people who read those books in 2020, hopefully they are doing a lot more now, right? Like it's been 6 years. What are you doing? But I was very adamant with my editor. I was like, I'm not going to spend time in my book convincing people that racism exists. Like, that's not what this book is going to be about. Like, in the introduction, I tell you, like, racism is real. I also tell you that racism against white people is not a thing, right? Like, that's the introduction. What we spend time doing is unpacking how racism shows up in the variety of ways that it does, and why people from different racial groups, white people in particular, might not be as attuned to some of those ways that it shows up, and then what to do about it. So,
Yeah.
very evidence-based, very tactical, and also a little bit funny. One of the reviews that I got was like, if you've read one book like this, you've read them all. And I was like, but this book was written by Dr. Evelyn Carter, and I am confident that you have never read a book written by me. So,
There you go, and that is the
yeah.
confidence that we all need to be bringing into every room, most
It
especially
took me
those
a
of
lot
us
a lot of time to get there. Yeah.
that
My husband
of
was like,
course.
"They don't know what they're talking about. You're you." And I was like, "That's right."
Well, I mean, going back to racism because part of the premise is this is, and what you're saying here is it's not for people for whom racism only means you're using a slur.
Yeah.
And that's the only way that you can be
Yeah.
racist. This is for people who know that is not true.
Yeah.
And most specifically, I think for white folks who need the
Yeah.
understanding of what else does it look like and how do I spot it and what do I do when I
Yeah.
spot it, right?
Yeah.
And just, even that idea of like understanding why it's different for you to show up in that confidence of saying, you've never read my book and my book
Yeah.
matters because I wrote it, versus even me saying that as a
Yeah.
woman. And that is still important for me as a woman to say it,
Yeah.
not as a white man, but also understanding the difference as a white woman, the difference of me saying it and you saying it. And those I think are really important things for white folks to grapple with, to understand.
Yeah.
And I want to get into some of the specifics of that, but let's start then, because I think we had talked about a specific incident that you have
Mhm.
had recently, because I think for those folks who sort of feel like, hey, I put up my black square on Instagram in 2020, if you remember that whole thing.
I do remember. Oh my
And I
God.
wore the pink pussy hat years before. So I've always
Yep.
been a feminist and I've always been an ally and all of these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And they sort of are maybe thinking like, I've been there, I've done that, I checked the box.
Yeah.
I want to paint some pictures of just like this stuff we are not post-racial. The world has not changed significantly since 2020. And if it has, I think there's an argument to be made that that it's gotten worse, not better.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay, good. You're shaking your head. You're like, yes. So that's good. So let's talk about the specific example, because I want to, as much as we can sort of stay in the professional space, since most of our readers are people who are, owning businesses and are wanting to think about these issues through that lens. So you're part of you attended a networking event, I
Yeah.
believe it was, and then had to leave. So if you
Yeah.
can't just talk us through what happened, because I think it's probably an example there of, I don't know, you can tell us whether it's micro or macro
Yeah,
racism.
yeah. I think well, we'll see. I sometimes on Instagram, I have a series. I haven't done one in a while actually, but I do a like, was that racist series? And I tell people a story and then I'm like, I know what I would say, but I'm curious about your question or your answer. Like, was that racist? Sometimes the answer that I would give is yes, sometimes it's no. In this case, definitely racist. But so what happened, I had been invited to join a space that was for women authors. And you said something that is very poignant. I think when you were like, there is something that is special about you as a Black woman saying like, you've never read a book by me before. That is also important for you as a woman to say, but that is different as a white woman versus, and that knowledge of the ways in which our identities are similar in terms of our gender, but are different because our gender experience is very much shaped by our race, is something that was missing in this space.
Mm.
And so it was a group and I was excited about it because I had been trying to network with other women who were authors, and I actually made some great connections in there. But basically, what drew me to the space was that they had this wonderful set of agreements up front. And so before you were even nominated, you had to review, like, here are the rules of engagement here. And they were comprehensive and they were fantastic. And so I was like, okay, these people have put a lot of thought and energy into creating a space that is, going to be like-minded people who are all aligned on the same principles for how we engage. And I really loved that. I'm a big fan of like setting norms and agreements for anything that you do, even like my book club. And so there was an exchange between two members where somebody made basically an offhand comment that when I read it, I was like, oh, that's not great. Um, and maybe they were speaking from their personal experience, right? Maybe not, but it was like to the tune of like all dogs hate cats, but it was about people, but it was that same level of like everybody from this group exists in this way, and therefore I don't deal with dogs.
Mhm.
And there was somebody else who I actually know who responded and was like, that was a kind of a ouch moment for me. Like I didn't love that. And the person, and so I saw that exchange. This is online. And I was like, oh my God, what a beautiful opportunity to live the norms and agreements that we all signed up for, because there was somebody who said somebody else responded and was like, ouch, like, just a quick, like, hey, and this could be an opportunity for the person to say, oops, let me try again. That is not what they did. They doubled down. They said, well, actually, in my experience, all dogs do hate cats, and I am right to not want to deal with dogs. And actually, you're making me feel really bad for saying that I don't like dogs, and I feel like that's actually racist more so than the thing that I said. So then I watched that and I was like, ugh. And it bothered me. It bothered me. I talked to my husband about it. I showed the exchange. I talked to my mom. Like, I talked to a lot of people about this exchange. And I was waiting for somebody, perhaps the co-creators of this group, to chime in. And when they did, they said, it's better to take these conversations offline. Hey, person who said that this was an ouch moment, you shouldn't have responded at all. And so then I replied, so I was like, well, here we are. And I want to actually um, note something, which is that I am very aware that when I go into spaces, I'm a Black woman, I'm very opinionated, I'm loud, I'm 5'2.5", but like I'm vibrant. I also don't want to always have to be the quote unquote DEI voice in a space. And so I was happy to join this group of other women authors. I did not want to join as the DEI person. And yet, I put on my DEI person hat because I knew that this was a problem. And I said, hey, I'm actually really thankful that this person responded publicly and said, ouch, because everybody needs to, like this is how we create community. This is how we learn. I actually talk about this in my book. Was that racist? Right. Um, and crickets. And so then I sent a message to the co-creators of the group, and I said, "Hey, like this is an opportunity for you to reset on what our norms are, and in fact, like remind people, like we said, we're a community, we're always learning, and perhaps this is an opportunity to revise the norms so that we can be more specific about what happens when somebody, has one of those learning moments in public." And one of the people responded and she was like, "I'm just not sure what you want me to do about this." And I was like, "I was pretty clear. I actually detailed for you exactly what to do." And I'm very proud of myself because I then responded and I said, "The fact that you gave this hope or helpless response is an example of the white feminism that I am not here for." And I was like, I have too many spaces in my life where I have to tiptoe and be like that. And I was like, I appreciate what this group could offer, but like, this ain't it. And I left. Um, I did find out later that actually one of the co-founders or co-creators group did send a message to the group, like basically talking about how they were going to revise the language and how they were going to, and also like referencing my book, which I thought was very cool. But for me, it was too little too late.
Yeah.
One thing that I will say I appreciate is that the person who had invited me to that group to begin with is a white woman. And she was on the thread that I had sent, and she did chime in and say, hey, I think what Evelyn is saying is da 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 da. And so I do appreciate that even in that moment, there was some allyship that was coming from the person who invited me into the space, right? Perhaps because she was aware that, like, as a white woman, she was inviting me into a space with other white women who were white womening. And she was like, guys, get it together. But anyway, that was the situation. And so what I think the takeaway from that is when we are setting up any kind of community or event or situation or gathering, it's lovely to have norms that that govern how we are going to engage in the space, ideally. What we also need to be prepared for is when people want to use those norms to create and sustain the safe space that you were promising with those norms and agreements. And that safe space may and will come at the expense of the comfort of other people, particularly those from dominant groups. And that's okay. And in that moment, ultimately, what the group chose is the comfort of the person who had made the comment, then protecting the psychological safety for everybody else, particularly the folks of color. And that's not cool. So
Yeah.
that was what happened.
Okay, good. There's so much here we can talk about. So first
I
of
know.
all, one of the things that I say as somebody who does a lot of community creation and space
Yes,
holding
yes.
is I always like to, one, when I'm in a space like that where there's a lot of folks in the room and I'm trying to hold space, I think it's really valuable to enter a space acknowledging your blind spots, right? So to say, I am a white woman, and with that identity and the privilege that comes with that identity, I know there will be blind spots, that I have blind spots, things I can't see because I lack lived experience, right? So I think just the acknowledgement of those things first and foremost is so helpful, right? And then to say, and here's what, if something happens, here's what that process should look like, right?
Yes.
Inform me, tell me how I can help, and then I will follow through on those things, right? Like, and I think, it's what we would call a harm repair process. And I'm wondering, so first, they had a lot of like, oh, these are our ideals. This is how we want to show up. And I think so many of us go into spaces with lots of wonderful values and here's the kind of rules of engagement, the community stuff. The piece that I often see missing is that second part of harm repair. It's like, here's how we want to show up, but there's no thought about, and then as you see, when it happens, there's no plan for or process for what do we do when something actually doesn't live up to these ideals, right?
Yes.
And so I'm guessing, were they lacking the harm repair process in that? Okay.
And I think, and I would say even like from what I recall of the kind of norms and kind of, they had it built in. What I actually think they were missing was the follow through on the accountability piece, right? Which accountability is my favorite word, because that's often what's missing is that, we can say, so for example, I work with a lot of corporations and as I'm sure you are aware and have experienced, interrupting is like rampant within corporate culture. I will say, as somebody who grew up in a Black culture and household where talking over each other was the norm, there are differences in interrupting. And so the interrupting I'm talking about is the one where it's like, I'm building a tower and somebody else comes and slaps down my tower because they want to build one. It's not the kind of interrupting where we're building a tower together. Anywho, what research has shown is that the kind of interrupting of like, I'm building my tower and then I'm going to come knock yours down happens a lot to women in corporate spaces. And so when I'm working with companies, first of all, I share this data. And of course, like the men in the room are like, what? This happens? And then the women in the room are like, yeah, it just did. There's actually one time where the guy who was like literally the worst offender of interrupting in the company was like, I did not know this was possible. And I could just see the steam rising off of like the women in the room. Anyway, so what I say to them is, it's one thing to have a norm that says don't interrupt. It's an entirely different thing to have a norm that says do not interrupt. And when you do, here is what is going to happen. And then actually do that thing, right? So if you start interrupting, Becky, and then I say, please stop, and then you keep going, that doesn't actually live up to the norm, right? So instead, what I tell people is you need to practice being like, hey, when you interrupt, I'm going to say, Becky, let's let Evelyn finish her thought. And then you can chime in if you would like. And if you keep it, no, let's wait and let Evelyn finish her thought, right? And as I'm saying this, it's reminding me of how much I have to repeat myself with my 3-year-old. But as I told somebody recently, 3-year-olds and 30-year-olds don't have a lot of differences between them. But yeah, so the follow through on the what happens when the norms are violated and then making sure that you are actually doing that thing is really what was missing in this space and in a lot of spaces because I think it's hard to realize like, oh no, I have to chime in and like be the moderator. But that role is so crucial. And in fact, I'm a part of another group of Black women authors that is now under development. And during one of our first meetings, when we were just kind of like throwing ideas around about what we wanted the space to be, I was like, hey, we need to have some strong community agreements and some people who are designated moderators who are going to follow through on those things. I am happy to be one of those people because it's very important to me. It's hard to do, but it's the only way that you create a community that people actually want to stick around in.
Yeah. I love all of that. And the other piece of what you had said earlier that I wanted to also just throw out my thoughts and either get your reaction or we don't have to, but is talking about safe space. And I, as a white woman, have come to a place after doing a lot of work and by no means saying that I have checked off the box of anti-racism work because I know it's a lifelong
You
journey.
did it.
Right. I'm done. Yay, A+ gold star. But knowing that I'm pretty far down my journey at this point and have done quite a bit of work, I have come to this conclusion that I don't think I can ever create a safe space for Black women. I think I can create safer spaces,
Yeah.
but I don't think I can ever create a safe space. And not just for Black women, also for disabled women,
Yeah.
for folks who have identities I don't hold. For trans women, I'm queer, but I'm not trans. I can't understand that experience, and I don't think any amount of my own unlearning will ever give me the. I'll never have the lived experience, right? I think there will always be the opportunity and probably the reality of harm that I will cause.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that when you know that there is that you can actually create a safe space. But I do think the aim of trying to create safer spaces feels better. And I see you smiling, and that makes me feel good because other Black women I've said that to have said that it actually feels really like that actually feels almost more invitational than
Yes.
somebody who's saying, I'm creating a
Yes.
safe space for Black women as a white woman. So I would
Yes.
just love your feedback on that because that's kind of where I've been sitting lately.
Yeah. It makes me smile because what I'm thinking of actually is a white woman that I worked with previously. And I just remember there's this situation that we had that I wish could have made it into my book and there just wasn't space. But I was talking, it was this person and a Black man who was our colleague, and then myself. And the Black man and I were talking about something. It was either like hair or TV shows that but like something that was like Black culture. Like we both knew exactly what we were talking about. And at one point I turned to the person who was like fairly quiet. And I was like, do you have any idea what we're talking about? And they were like, no. And they're like, but go ahead, like keep going. Um, and it was this wonderful moment where I was like, they are not making me pause and explain something to them because they feel left out of Black culture. They're realizing that like if they don't know, they can do the Googling on their own, or they can just like kind of observe and watch. And this doesn't need to be a part of this doesn't need to be a conversation that they have to actively participate in between these two Black folks, right? And it was this wonderfully safe feeling that it gave me knowing that. And so I do think that for all of us who are trying to create spaces where people from a variety of backgrounds are going to interact, that knowledge that we can always do our best to create a safer environment, but we are never going to be completely safe, um, is great. And I think it's really fascinating because I can hear the people who are like, but I am safe. Like, I want you to know, like, I am a safe space. I'm an ally. But what I am hearing from you is that you are always doing your best to be open and to, to do what you think makes sense. But there are always going to be things that you don't consider because you're not a part of our group and you don't have that lived experience that you can draw from. Um, and so what I think really makes a space safe is the willingness to say, I'm going to do my very best. And here is how you can know that I have done the prerequisite work necessary to make this like minimum good, right? And also that I am always going to be open to your feedback and that when you give it to me, I'm not going to lash out. I'm not going to tell you that it's just as racist to call me out as, as the thing that I said. And that's how you kind of like bit by bit build safety. What I will also say, though, is that I am very adamant about the fact that some people deserve safe spaces and other people need to have courage and do not. Some people, like, I feel like 10 years ago, it was like safe space versus brave space. I don't know. There's a lot of jargon out there.
Yeah.
But basically what it boils down to for me is that if you are a person in a dominant group or of a dominant identity, the world is created for you. And what that means is that your safety is kind of the default. If you are somebody from a marginalized group, that is not the case. And so when I go into various spaces, I'm brave every day just existing in this world as a Black woman. What I need in these spaces is to feel safe, to feel like I can proverbially take my bra off, let my hair down, and just, right? If you are somebody that is existing with safety as your default, then you are going to find that the things that make me feel safe might be things that make you feel challenged because you are confronting a different reality. And so your safety as a dominant group person is not the priority. Your courage, your bravery, your willingness to accept that discomfort is. And that actually is how you create safety for me. And in turn, create safety for yourself too, because we realize that we can trust each other as we are learning and growing together. But that's something that I think is really important. But yeah, I love the acknowledgement that like I might not be a safe space but I'm always going to try to be safer every day.
Yeah, well, I wanna get into discomfort, so this is perfect because
Yeah.
one of the reasons I know that I'm, at least not yet, can't be a fully safe space is because I do still, when I get called in or when I am challenged or when something comes up, my go-to sensation in my body is
Yeah.
defensiveness. It
Yes.
is, right? That feeling of
Yes.
like, uh-oh, discomfort has arisen
Yes.
and I need to fight off the discomfort. And as you experience in that writers group you're talking about, often that looks like, for some white women, I think it can look like the defensiveness can show up as like pushing back.
Yes.
Sometimes it can look like yep, the tears show up,
You're just
right?
making me feel like a bad person. How
Right? Let me make you now coddle, comfort
Yep.
me. Sometimes
Yep.
it can look like just, I'm gonna escape because I can't be
Yep.
with this discomfort. But the discomfort showing up isn't the problem. The discomfort is conditioned, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say here, but I'm sure you're probably like, yeah, the discomfort is gonna be there, right? Because I saw in something you wrote about like how white folks aren't socialized to recognize some of these things around racism, to recognize that something is racist, let
Yeah.
alone to be with it and then deal with it. We're socialized into politeness, and I use
Yes.
air quotes because the
Yes.
politeness this means, or professionalism, again, air
Yeah.
quotes, because these are all just terms that white folks have come up with to basically coddle to the discomfort of white folks to say basically anything you need, we don't like. If we don't like
Yep.
it, we're going to say that it's not polite, it's not
Yep.
professional. Let's
You're
take that
ruffling feathers.
offline.
You've
Yeah.
got sharp elbows.
Right. Let's take that offline.
Oh
You
my
just
god,
all of
yes.
that stuff. So
You're
that's
probably seeing
but the
why corporate America and I didn't get along
oh, it's
very
the
well.
worst, right? But that immediate reaction isn't it's a problem, but it isn't really the problem. The problem is, how are you with that reaction?
Yes.
What happens when the reaction shows up? And I think that's important for white people to hear that, like, because I think too often what we think we're supposed like, oh, if I'm still showing up like that, then I'm bad, right?
Yes.
And then that isn't the work. The work isn't
Yes.
to say, how do I make sure there's never going to be discomfort about these issues?
Yep.
It's learning, how do I be with the discomfort? And that's what you're saying, I think, with that whole idea of like, my job is my role in the room isn't to feel safe, it's to learn how to be with the discomfort that comes up
Yes.
when I see that conversation happening.
Yep.
And instead of sitting on the sidelines, can I actually get to a place where even in the discomfort, I say, I have a role here, a responsibility here as a
Yes.
person with privilege in the room to not make Evelyn have to be the one who always has this conversation, right?
Yes.
So just, I would love to hear some of your thoughts about politeness and professionalism and just white discomfort and how that is keeping us from actually being allies.
Yes. Okay, so, I was recently making updates to my website, and I was going back to one of the first popular press articles I wrote, which is about the Starbucks, training. Remember when Starbucks, like, shut down
Yes.
all of their cafes for, like, day-long, whatever training, and the headline, which I did not pick, but it was brilliant, is Starbucks diversity training won't work unless it makes white people uncomfortable. And I still remember being like, kudos to the editor for like really seeing exactly the thesis of what my essay was about. And so discomfort actually is so central to conversations about anti-racism that it is chapter 2 of my book. It is called The Gift of Fear. My book, since we got people that have just joined,
Yes.
is Was That Racist? How to Detect, Interrupt, and Unlearn Bias in Everyday Life. It is available in hard copy, ebook, author-narrated audiobook, wherever books are sold and borrowed. And if it is not at your local library, request it so that it can be there. But yeah, so chapter 2 talks all about discomfort. And what I love actually is, and I'm a social psychologist, so research is like my jam. And there's a lot of research on what's called the self-regulation of prejudice. And it's interesting to me because I am a mom of a 3.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And with my 3.5-year-old, we're actually working a lot on self-regulation, right? Like with her emotions. And basically what it is for her is noticing that when her body feels activated, when she's like responding because there's something happening that she doesn't like, teaching her that the reaction should not be that she flops on the ground and just wails. And to be frank, lots of white people have the emotion regulation skills of a 3-year-old when it comes to conversations about racism. And so all the things that you were just saying, the discomfort, they like are proverbially or like sometimes literally wailing, right? And so the thing that I love about research is that it has looked at the ways that people respond when they are told that they have done or said something that is biased. And there's this counterintuitive finding that when you receive that feedback, people who turn those feelings inward, who are disappointed in themselves, who are feeling ashamed or guilty, those are the people that actually change their behavior for the better for the future. People who turn those emotions outward and feel angry at the person or upset with them, those are the ones who lash out. And so what that means is that we have to find a way to notice that the discomfort in our body is a sign that we need to pause. And so the same thing that I tell my 3-year-old applies here. Take a deep breath. Notice what's happening in your body. If you feel like you're going to cry and you're a white woman, don't put your tears on the other person. Step away and come back. And learn to verbalize why you're feeling the way that you are feeling without centering yourself. You're not feeling discomfort because they made you feel bad. You are feeling this way because you learned that you did something that doesn't align with who you want to be. And what you then say is, I'm sorry. And I just this morning, I feel like all of my examples now are about kids because it's just like so salient. This morning I was putting lotion on my daughter's legs and I have long nails right now and I accidentally like scratched her basically. And um, she was like, ow, mama, you scratched me. And my instinct still was to be like, I didn't mean it. But instead what I said is, you're right. I did. I'm very sorry. I need to slow down. And she said, yeah, mama, you need to slow down next time. And so that is my way of, with her, letting her know I recognize that I did harm. I am going to tell you the solution, which is I'm going to slow down, not say to you, I didn't mean to, because at the end of the day, her leg was scratched, right? So all of this is a roundabout way of talking about how discomfort in conversations about racism is something that we need to learn to sit with, and that white people in particular who have been socialized to be like polite and whatnot, really what that is a rejection of the idea that I need to hold that discomfort in myself and learn how to process it. And what the research shows is that when you get good at doing that, that's actually how you change your behavior to prevent those similar things from happening again in the future.
I mean, yeah, I love it. And I'm thinking about my kid and, I think so many of us were parented in the ways that we are also now showing up with racism.
Yes.
Because the way you're talking about parenting is how I parent, but it's not how many of us were parented. We
No.
were gaslit by our parents. We were, all of the things we were like, oh, shut up, get over it. It's not that
Yes.
big a deal. I didn't mean to do it, whatever, right? And we are often doing that to other people. And I think it's because, like you said, socialized. These are learned behaviors. And I think that might be part of the problem that many white folks have is because for them, that word racism is so charged, as it should be. Because
Yes.
guess what?
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Think about on the other side of it, living with that experience, where we make it so charged
Yeah.
for us as if it's the worst thing that we could be called. But think about living on the other side of it. But I think because that word is so charged, like, we were avoiding it like hot coal, right? Like, I
Yeah.
can't have that near me, and so we end up resorting to or just, like, falling in with those learned behaviors, and in those moments, it's really hard to show up as that person you want to be, right? It can be really
Yeah.
hard to put the things that you sort of have learned through book learning or whatever, because we aren't learning it necessarily through lived experience. We resort to that like immediate socialized response of,
Yeah.
no, it wasn't me and I didn't mean to and whatever. And I think for white women in particular, that experience of the crying, and I think, I mean, maybe rather than me talking about it, I would love for you
No,
to,
it's great. I'm enjoying. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
well, just why that's so problematic. That like
Oh,
when we as white women show up with our tears, because I have heard white women say, like, am I not allowed to have feelings or what when they get challenged on those white tears?
yeah.
And I just think it's really important for white women to understand why in those moments it is much better for you to say, I need a few minutes and then I will come back and I want to deal with this. I want to talk about this, than it is to show up and cry in those moments or
Yeah.
in any other way. Center
Yeah.
yourself. But just explain that really quick for white women who don't yet understand why that's so important.
Yeah. The simplest reason is because when you cry, people care that you're upset. And that takes away from the initial thing that caused you to cry in the first place, which is that I'm upset, right? So um if I say to you, Becky, the thing that you made a comment that really made me feel small and
Mm.
and less than, and it felt like a maybe a macroaggression, and you say and you start crying, everything in the room is going to shift toward making you, with this very visible, very big display of sadness and hurt, be taken care of.
Yeah.
And nobody is taking care of me.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, as you said, experiencing racism is worse than being called racist. I promise you, that is true. But when we shift to caring about your tears, what we are saying is that at a minimum, the experience of being called racist is as bad, if not worse than experiencing racism. And
Yeah.
often what happens is that the energy shifts so much to the white woman's tears that we never get back to the person who was saying at the beginning, I was harmed. Um, so that's why the tears are so frustrating. I also think it's important to note that some of this is just stereotypes as well. Um, so we just saw, and I actually did not see it because I wasn't watching that shit, but we just saw collectively, right, the UFC fighter who was
Yes.
doing something and then was like, said Michelle Obama is a man. Which, like, what are we doing? Like, dude, it's 2026. Find a new freaking punching bag. But at any rate, the notion that Black women are not feminine, are are not women, goes back to slavery and Barbara, right? Like this idea that we are workhorses and we're manly and we don't feel pain in the same way as white women do. Like all of that is why white female tears are so dangerous, because it is reinforcing that you, this tiny little precious white woman, are being attacked by the angry, aggressive Black woman, and you need to be protected at all costs. And that does so much harm because it reinforces this idea that you are precious and feminine and I am not. And so that's like the white tears in the moment are harmful because it's shifting the focus of who needs to be taken care of. But in the broader sense, it really is tapping into this like centuries long narrative that white women are, need to be protected from the angry, aggressive Black women. And that I have no patience for.
Yeah. And just to go back to something we talked about earlier and to reiterate, and your tears and my tears are not the same and are
Yes.
not treated or seen the same. So
Yep.
you could be crying. So I might be, and some of it, like, let's also, mirror neurons kick in. You're crying. I'm
Yeah.
feeling sad. Like, it's not to say that it's not about like saying, hey, white woman, you're not allowed to feel, right? It's none of that. It's saying if you need to do that, the thing is then to say, I need a moment and go
Yeah.
deal with that on your own so that doesn't become centered in the room because your tears are going to take away from her tears. And
Yeah.
her tears are the tears that matter in the moment. So, and
Yep.
I threw out a book called White Tears, Brown Scars by Ruby
Yeah.
Maud to also just, and also your book obviously as well, Was That Racist? Because these things are really important for us to learn. And we've talked about micro and macro aggressions, the macro being the like a slur. The things are
Yeah.
these super obvious and also kind of speak to this like global idea around like racism. And then there's like the micro, it's the little things that
Yeah.
happen. And I would love if you could just share for people who are in the workspace, whether they are people who have employees or just a person of one, but you're showing up in networking calls as a white person. You are, you're going to client meetings. You are hiring potentially, even if you don't have employees, you're hiring contractors. You're on social media engaging.
Yeah.
We are always all in community. So even if you are a business of one, you have the opportunity all the time as a white
Yep.
person to cause a lot of harm and not even recognize it because, as you say, you haven't been socialized to see that as what it is. And I think very often we're actually socialized to really convince ourselves things aren't racist
Yeah.
that are.
Yeah.
So could you give some examples that aren't too painful for you to share? I don't want to I don't want this to become like a trauma thing, but
Yeah.
just of what like microaggressions, because again, for people who are like, oh, well, it's not like I used a slur. Like,
Yeah.
what are the things that they may not even realize they're doing in moments that
Yeah.
are problematic, that they need to be looking for some accountability, like
Yeah.
offering
Yeah.
accountability for?
Yeah. So I'll say a couple things. The first of which is that, there are lots of words to describe the experience of racism and how it shows up. And those words are often imprecise for how the experience like varies across people, right? So I do talk about microaggressions in my book. And I also talk to people who are like, none of the things that you are describing feel like microaggression. They feel very macro to me, like it's very obvious, right? So when I'm talking about microaggressions, for better or for worse, I'm talking about like the fleeting, like I think about this like drive-by racism, right? Where it's just
Mhm.
like, you're like, you throw out a comment and you keep it going. It's the like, oh, you're so articulate and keep it going. Or, oh, your hair is wild today, which somebody had recently just said, not to me, but to somebody else, right? Like there are these things that are very rooted in racism. And when I think the disconnect between the label microaggressions for people is that like, I know that those are racist statements. And so they don't feel micro. They feel very like glaring to me. But microaggressions, for better or for worse, refers to those like fleeting interactions that are just like, oh, I think about them as like verbal paper cuts or mosquito bites, right? They're the things that like I probably can shake them off and keep it going. But over time, if I've got a handful of paper cuts, like that's going to hurt, especially when I get in the shower and wash my hands with soap, right? So those are microaggressions. And the experiences of them vary. I wrote about this one in my newsletter recently, which to the conversation we were having earlier about like, kind of reflecting on those experiences. It was something that happened to me in like 2017, but I had written it down in my journal and it was fresh when it came back to write about it, of a man who, uh, after I gave a presentation was like, you're a great speaker, but you'd be even more effective if you were just an older white man. And I think that he was like trying to commiserate with me because he was also a man of color, being like, man, like these people would really listen to you more if you just,
Mm.
were not you. But it wasn't experienced as anything great. Another example is when I was uh, getting ready to present and I was loading up my presentation on my computer, which was on the podium, and somebody walked in. They're like, "Are you the speaker?" I was like, "Yes." And they're like, "Really? You're the speaker?" Like, mhm. They're like, "You? You're the speaker?" And I was like, 3 times. Like, wow, that's a record. And so in both of those cases, right, the person probably was uh, not intending, they weren't walking in being like, I'm going to say a racist thing or a misogynistic thing or a misogynoiristic thing. Um, but they did. And the experience of that for me, right, was like, shook my confidence. The first person that when I was getting ready to do the presentation, I was like, well, now I know that there is at least one person in this room who has verbalized that they can't believe that I, this young Black woman who is 5'2.5", is really going to be their facilitator today. Show up anyway, right? And that feeling as a Black woman of knowing that I have to push down what everybody else is thinking about me and show up anyway is really exhausting, which goes back to why safe spaces are so important for us, like knowing that I don't have to push anything down, I can just be. Um, but what I also think is important and something that you brought up is like all of these things, calling them racist, can feel very jarring to people, right? I don't think the person who, I know because when I've said about the story where the person was like, really, you're the speaker? I was like, that was racist. People are like, well, how do you know? He didn't say that he didn't think that you, a Black woman, could be the speaker. He was just asking. It's like, yes, but the questioning of my credibility suggests that somewhere in his brain, he couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that I was going to be the person that was teaching him, which suggests that he doesn't see me, a Black woman, as a person of authority, which is racist. And that is the racist work that has been done to diminish Black women and our standing in society. And he, for better or for worse, had bought into that in some way, shape, or form by asking me this question. And so what I often say to people is like, remember that just because you are thinking things in your brain doesn't mean that they always need to come out. And if you are someone that is looking at a person who is on a stage, plugging in their computer and clicking through their slides, assume that they are the speaker. Maybe I was the IT person who was setting up the slides. But in the moment, if you have an opportunity to assume that the person from the underrepresented group is a higher status role, do it. And I think what so many people do is they assume that we are the lower status role. And I want to be very clear. There is nothing wrong with being an IT person. There is nothing wrong with being a grocery store worker. The issue is that nobody ever assumes that the white person is the IT person or the grocery store worker. They always assume that they are the person who is the CEO or the president or the patron or whatnot. So assume that the person from the underrepresented group is the higher status role and notice what happens to the things that come out of your mouth in those moments.
Well, I want to, if I can, I'm going to just share something vulnerable in that. As you were sharing that example, my mind immediately went to a place of, but you look really young. So could you just been that you thought you were young, right? And but then and then I think I hope as an example of like, continuing to do this work as you said that, I felt that reaction come up. And I could immediately sort of recognize it as, oh, that's interesting. Why is that thought coming up for you?
Yeah.
Why are you feeling, why is your, the tension in your body sort of wanting to almost come to that guy's rescue, justify whatever. And why at the expense of what you are telling me how you experienced it, right? Because ultimately what matters is how you experienced it. And that's if we are saying we want to center humans in any experience, that's the thing that matters. And if you say to me, it felt like there was at least some racism inside that statement, then it is important and incumbent on me then to say, okay, I don't have to fight you on it. I don't have to say, oh, but it could have been whatever. All that stuff I can just sit with and say, I can have, and like you said, I can let those thoughts exist. I'm sharing them now only in that.
Right. We're having a live conversation and that's the.
And I want to share it as an example of, as the white person, those things are going to come up for us. It is, again, it's that conditioning. And so can we learn to do that work? And I also just want to share one other thing vulnerably of an example where I caused harm in a room and what came of that. So I was running a group program as a coach. I had, I don't know, there's probably 6 to 8 people on the call. And one of the women in the room was Black. All other women in the room were white. And we were talking about, she was offering up something about, because we were talking about our goals, and hers was around losing weight. And I feel really strongly about diet culture and how harmful that is, and all the reasons problematic, including racism being a reason it's problematic.
Yeah.
And took that moment to decide to go on a bit of a rant about diet culture and why I felt like it was, trying to sort of, in my mind, lovingly encourage her towards a different sort of goal versus that. And by the end of my rant, I had already, my brain was starting to do some of the work that unfortunately my mouth hadn't yet done.
Yeah.
And I could see her reaction and her shutting down. And me feeling immediately it took a minute. It took longer than I wish it would have. I wish I would have not talked before, but this is the reality. And I started to sense this oh, I just decided to lecture the only Black woman in the room about diet culture and its racist origins to the only Black woman in the room as a white woman. So I was very quickly able to say, in that moment, not long after the rant, to apologize and also ask her to join me later for a conversation we did. We talked it through and it ended up being great. In fact, I think our relationship was deepened because of me being able to acknowledge the harm and move on from there. But I'm not no one's immune. We're going to cause harm. And I just think that piece around that racism being charged, we have to learn how to sort of release the charge from it for ourselves, for ourselves as white folks.
Yeah.
And that it's not the worst thing that's going to happen to you. If you can get to the place of understanding, the worst thing in that moment would have been to not
Yeah.
apologize, to leave that person harmed and me running, which would have been my reaction 10, 15 years ago, probably.
Yeah.
I would have run from it because it was
Yeah.
too uncomfortable. Um, and just I think about that, like, just what's
Yeah.
the worst thing? For me to have to sit with maybe I caused some harm and there was some racism that came out, not because I am racist, but because I exist inside of racism and it's in me, or her having to sit with that and forever having a different feeling about
Yes.
me, right? So,
Forever.
yeah, I
Yes.
just what your thoughts are on that, and I know we need to wrap up.
Well, I so what I love actually is how you noticed, this, right? So, I think
That was
all
not
of us
always me, just to
well,
be
but all of us have these moments where we'll, like,
yeah.
kind of get on our soapbox and like, "Da, da, 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 da." But you said something very important. You noticed the Black woman's, like, face and, like, you noticed her, like, turning inward. This is also something I work with on my work on with my kids, right? Like, my 3-year-old loves her baby sister, like, loves her, loves her, loves
Mhm.
her. She also likes to hold her, and sometimes she'll wrap her arms around her neck and, like, lift, and I mean, she's basically choking out her sister. Um and so, in all while this is happening, the baby is like, "Ah, ah, ah." And so what I have said to my older toddler is like, "Stop. What do you notice about what your sister is doing?
Mm,
Is she smiling? No. She's crying, right? Is she moving your hands away, right?" So all of these things are teaching her to pay attention to the subtle signals that in this case, they're not subtle because the baby is literally screaming, right? But, like, the subtle signals that you are getting that might not be verbal, but that very much are clues that you need to stop. And because of lots of reasons, I am not going to probably say to you, or maybe the Black woman in that case wasn't gonna say to you, like, "Hey, Becky, like, this, like, anti-diet culture diatribe you're going on, like, that's racist." But you can see it in her body, and if you pay attention, there's actually research that looks at how one of the reasons that racism persists is the de and infrahumanization of people from underrepresented backgrounds. What that literally means is, like, I don't see you as much of a person. I don't think that you have the same emotions and emotional responses that I do, if you are from a marginalized group, right? And so what that means is that it makes it easier for me to dismiss the things that you are doing, feeling, saying. And if you reject that, then you start to notice, like, oh, I saw the flash of pain that went across her eyes, even if it was just for a moment. And what I always recommend to people is to respond more to those cues than to anything else that's coming out of a person's mouth.
right.
And even if they keep going, there is so much power in you being like, hey, I noticed that, like, you had a reaction when I said this thing. I want to back up because I think I need to try again. I'm really sorry. Like, and what I have found, and it sounds like in this moment you did too, is that people are so amazed that you even noticed those reactions. I say, yeah, I did. And it opens up a conversation. It opens up trust. It opens up an opportunity for the relationship to deepen because you've shown I am really paying attention to you. I am locked in. And you can trust that I care about those fleeting moments that are going across your eyes. And that even if you don't verbalize it, I am going to pay attention to you so much that I'm going to notice and I am going to take accountability and action for whatever happens next. And that's really, really powerful. So I appreciate you sharing both of those
Well,
anecdotes.
thank you. And I just think it's really important for white folks to also acknowledge, like, when these things get because
Yeah.
it's easy for me to sit here and be like, "Oh, well, I've learned it all." Right? Again, the whole gold star thing, and I know there's a good chance I've caused harm in this conversation, right? Like, that is just the reality of these things, and so I think it's important to watch that and to model that it's okay. Like, it's okay to say, "Yeah, I screwed up." Right? It
Can
doesn't
I
make
share with
me
you
yeah.
my own thing that's, like, haunting me, and I didn't do anything about it in the moment, but it did inform my behavior later. So I just came off of a week of events in Eastern Iowa. My mom is from Cedar
Mm,
Rapids, and
yeah.
so she organized this, like, amazing book tour for me. I had events in Iowa City and Cedar Rapids all over, and they were great. On Tuesday, I had an event in Iowa City, and it was mostly white people in the room, but there were people from a variety of racial, like, I was like, "Okay, Iowa City, we're coming out here." And I was talking with my conversation partner for that event about identity and about how white is a racial identity. And there was, I said, I was like, spoiler alert, like white people, like you are white. You can say that. And so I said to the room, I was like, are you white? And most people said yes. And then there were a couple people who were like, no. And I was like, right. Because not everybody in here is white. And in my head, I was like, Evelyn, you, a Black woman, just centered all of the white people and like did not create space for the like non-white people who were here. And like my book is for everybody. And I just it made me feel so like disappointed in myself. And then like at the end of my talk, but before the signing, two of the Black people who were there like got up and left, probably because the formal event was over and like they had something right. So like I was reading it and all these things. And I was like, oh my God, I like really whiffed it. And that haunted me so much so that when I had an event a couple of days later with also a mostly white audience, but not an entirely white audience, I did something similar, but I was like, if you are white, are you white? And they said, yeah. And then like, and I was like, and shout out to the not white people in here because love you. Right. And so I am never going to know how the people at the event in Iowa City on that Tuesday felt. Like maybe it didn't even register with them that was how it felt, right? But like it felt so bad to me to realize in the moment. And I didn't say anything about it in the moment because I was like, well, this is complicated and who has time to verbalize all of it, right? But it did change my behavior and what I said a couple of days later. And I think that there's this other piece of like sometimes we do harm and we will never get to resolve it with the person that we did the harm to. And so there are people out there who like might be thinking, well, Dr. Evelyn Carter does not know how to like talk to non-white people. And like they would like that's their reality. And that was what I showed in that moment. And all I can ever do is try to do better and to use that feeling of, ooh, we didn't like that to inform how I behave differently for the future. So that's what I hope for everybody who is working on their racism. But like, we just got to try to do better the next time, always.
It's so yeah, thank you, because that's just so important for people to hear, I think, right? Because I can feel as you're talking, I'm thinking of like, oh, I know I caused harm to that person once, and like, and then just you start thinking about all the countless people I don't even know that I've caused harm to.
I know.
And we have to learn to be able to, like you said, you have to be able to release that. And all you can do is just try to keep getting better and learn from it. So thank you. And if you want to learn, make sure that you get your book, Dr. Evelyn Carter's book, Was That Racist? There's a link there. And if you're here live, I'll put it in the show notes. If you're watching elsewhere, make sure you grab the book because there's just, especially I think if you're white, but as you said, it's written for everyone. But I think especially if you're not Black, I think because even if you do hold a marginalized identity, I think just it's important to acknowledge as well that that doesn't mean that you're not immune from also causing harm. And frankly, even if you are Black, because as you mentioned, that older Black man who said something that left you with that sort of feeling. So again, I think it's important for all of us to learn how to sort of change our programming around, first of all, just understanding if something's racist. But then I think the most important part is that, like, then how do we do the internal work to be able to get to that place where we can be with that discomfort and have those discussions in the moment and do the harm repair? Because going back to that story you shared at the very beginning about being in that writers group, your experience, you'd probably still be in that group had harm repair happen.
Yes, I would. Yes, I would. And I also will note that, like, to the point about experiencing racism being worse than being called racist, I, as a debut author, am missing out on important information sharing and resources that is happening in that group because of their decision to prioritize somebody else's comfort over harm repair. And I made the decision that my feelings of safety were more important than that, but it also means that, like, I am missing out. So yeah, like harm repair would have gone a long way.
It goes so far, and I think we so often think, again, because we're prioritizing our own discomfort in the moment, and we just sort of think, well, I've screwed it up now, so it's all over, and it's like, it doesn't have to be, and once you
have to be all over.
Yeah, once you go through the harm repair process and you survive it, you realize like, oh, that wasn't so bad after all.
It wasn't so bad. That's like, yes, harm repair. It wasn't so bad after all. Like I can do this again. Yeah.
There's a sequel to your book, Harm Repair. It wasn't so bad after all. Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. I really appreciate your time. Again, everyone get the book, Was That Racist by Dr. Evelyn Carter. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.